About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and anthropology, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, which have been going on for over a year now, we've looked at some of the models developed to explain our mental and emotional experience and the experiments that have supported them. We learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we are aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects. What we are aware of, our personal awareness, usually called the conscious mind. What we aren't aware of, that keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, which could be called our individual subconscious mind, and what we aren't aware of, that connects us with all beings and guides us in our actions, the individual superconscious. We then learned that we can change our state of consciousness and shift what aspects of mind we are aware of and what we're capable of over time. From neuroscientists, we learned that the brain modifies whatever it receives from both the bodily senses and from the mind to fit past patterns of experience, following Begg's principle that, quote, neurons that fire together wire together, end quote, forming what's called the default network in the brain. This means that at any given moment we are seeing, hearing, and feeling what we expect or believe we will experience. We also learned that while it's possible to say where in the brain various processes are active, no one has yet been able to pinpoint where our memories are stored or how ideas and thoughts are formed. We then saw that many responses in our body happen faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body, and they often show up in the body long before we are aware of what we are responding to. As a result, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is, in fact, the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. The brain, then, could best be understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the senses and transmitting them to the rest of the body and the mind. Some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined, and the person has been declared dead. This lack of brain activity may explain why most reports from those who've been through such what are called, quote, near-death, unquote, experiences have a difficult time describing them. Their experiences don't fit the patterns of expectation stored in their brain's neuronal connections. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists regardless of whether the body is functioning. It permeates and develops with the body and the brain. as it is told by the senses through the brain what the body's experiences of the world out there is like. This field we call mind appears to be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches and sometimes several feet around the body. And some researchers, as well as teachers of the ancient traditions, those we call shamans, say it looks like a glowing egg shape extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads, around and through the body. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields. And yet, some experiments have demonstrated that minds can vibrate along similar patterns. They resonate with each other, like notes in a chord. Such resonant minds are able to sense whether the other is focusing attention on them or about to come home, and are changed when another resonant mind changes. Their bodies, and sometimes their pets' bodies, have been measured as changing when something they're connected with turns attention their way, even though they can't see or hear them doing so. These experiments help explain how the belief of a care provider in a treatment can help a patient receiving that treatment experience healing. And it helps us understand what's called the placebo effect. We've learned also that mind affects energy and matter in a variety of other ways. For example, in the famous double-slit experiments in quantum physics, the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. For decades now, computer operators have been able to change the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or even their printouts. And the collective human mind has changed the readouts from random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. Because of the nature of fields, and because of things like the Global Consciousness Project, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual field of mind as part of a larger field, what Jung called a collective consciousness, Teilhard de Chardin called a noosphere, and others call a global brain. And more scientists are saying that the field of mind extends even beyond the Earth. They're equating it with the quantum or zero-point field, out of which all matter and energy arises. They call it the Akashic field, using the Sanskrit term for, quote, the essence of everything that exists in the material world, end quote. And we've learned from a neurologist and physicist who are using the equations that describe aspects of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms that it's possible to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of our material world. With these understandings, we've explored some of the more popular ideas in the modern world of how the mind works, including the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, how we can access information in that field, the quantum or Akashic field, through our insight, intuition, and even channeling, how dreams affect the body and our consciousness, and how music affects the brain and the body and our connections with other fields of mind. These past few weeks, we've been looking at the role of mind and our state of consciousness in the healing process and the ways we can enhance or slow down the body's healing through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention. Today, I thought we'd focus on that wonderful state of being we experience when we're functioning at our best, doing the thing we love. Yes, it's called flow, and I found this wonderful clip to help us understand it.
My name is Stephen Kotler. I'm a writer and a researcher, and my latest book is The Art of Impossible. Flow itself, actually, the term is coined by Goethe, who uses the German word Rausch, which means overflowing with joy. Nietzsche actually wrote about flow. William James worked on the topic, but Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is often referred to as the godfather of flow psychology. He was very interested in sort of well-being, meaning of life, and he went around the world talking to people about the times in their lives when they felt their best and they performed their best. Everywhere he went, people said the same thing. I'm in this altered state of consciousness where every action, every decision I make seems to flow effortlessly, perfectly, seamlessly from the last. Flow actually feels flowy. More specifically, it refers to any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You're so focused on the task at hand, so focused on what you're doing, everything else just seems to disappear. But one of the things that athletes talk about a lot is what they call the voice. Often when I'm skiing in flow, I will get directions, right, left, do this, do that, and it's very quick. You either do what the voice is telling you to do, or you tend to crash.
So this concept of flow, which you probably have heard about, has been around for a while. Goethe back in the 1700s with the idea of being overflowing with joy. And then we had William James and Nietzsche in later years exploring the same concept of being in a place where joy is our norm and the universe seems to be functioning just for our fullest experience. The other name that he used is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, except he said Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So this is a man who wrote a book called Flow years and years and years ago. I actually met him long before he discovered the whole flow thing because he was a systems scientist trying to understand how it is that we create and self-create our systemic experience, our experience as a mind-body system. He was using computer algorithms to help him understand it, and then he went out and started surveying people and discovered this possibility of a state of consciousness in which just being, we get to experience a fulfilled state, and the doing comes out of the being. If you read a book called, for example, Zen and the Art of Archery, way back when, we are the bow, the arrow, and the target in that moment of flow, and there is no way that we can miss. Yes? So this was Stephen Kotler, who was explaining flow, and now I'm going to let him come back on and have him help us understand how we get into the state of consciousness that has been called flow.
So there are a number of different things you can do to sort of prepare yourself and prepare the environment to drop into flow. The flow triggers are your toolkit. 22 of them have been discovered. There are probably way more, but so far researchers have identified 22. The most basic of flow's triggers, complete concentration. You really want to sort of start your work session, if you can, in relationship to your physiology. I like to wake up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. That's when I'm most awake, most alert. I am married to a night owl. My wife doesn't wake up till 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. That's when her brain comes alive. And then you want to try to block out 90 to 120 minutes for uninterrupted concentration. Practice distraction management ahead of time. So you want to turn off your phone, turn off email, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. All your messages, all your alerts. There was a study where they found that coders in flow, if they get knocked out by distraction, a knock at the door, a text alert or whatever, it can take them 15 minutes to get back into flow. If they can get back in at all, flow only shows up when all of our attention is in the right here, right now. One way to kind of explore flow triggers, there's a cluster of them that are predominantly dopamine triggers. They drive focus, they drive attention, they drive alertness, and excitement. And there's a lot of different ways to get dopamine. Novelty produces dopamine. We see the same thing with unpredictability, complexity, the experience of awe. You look up at the night sky and you see stars everywhere, and you know those stars are actually universes, and you get sort of perceptual vastness. If you've ever done a crossword puzzle or Sudoku, you get an answer right, that little rush of pleasure you get, that's dopamine. And then you usually get a couple of answers right in a row. That's because the dopamine that is now in your system is amplifying pattern recognition. We get that same dopamine from risk-taking. And this could be physical risks, emotional risks, social risks, intellectual risks, possibly spiritual risks. We get the dopamine not as a reward for taking the risk, which is what some people used to believe, but now we know it's to kind of drive motivation.
So in the model that we've been developing here, what he is calling the flow state, or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called the flow state, is that state in which we have turned off the default structure of our thinking and allowed the mind to do and be us. That's simply all it is. The brain does various things in the process, for example, releasing dopamine, that helps to keep the default structure from taking over again and allows the mind to continue to be our experience. So whether you enter into the flow state through, as he suggested, a process that challenges your skills just a little bit, just beyond your normal skill level, or whether it's through engaging in something so fully that there isn't anything else existing in your awareness except that which you are being and doing, the default thought structure has been shut down, and the doing becomes the being. And that's really what we're aiming for, isn't it? And in that state, we find that the body is perfectly healthy and normal. There are no complaints. There are no discomforts. There is just the being that is unfolding as this new experience. I just love hearing about how people are discovering all these ways that we get to be fully human. It's delightful. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a book that various people have been very excited about. The book is called Ultra Learning. The subtitle, Master Hard Skills, Outsmart the Competition, and Accelerate Your Career. It's by Scott H. Young, and it's been around since 2019. The book has been talked about a lot online recently. I think that he came up with a technique for marketing the book by having people talk about it on their podcasts. But in the foreword, it says, Scott H. Young incorporates the latest research about the most effective learning methods and the stories of other ultra-learners like himself, among them Benjamin Franklin, chess grandmaster Judith Polgar, and Nobel laureate physicist Richard Feynman, as well as a host of others. The polymath Nigel Richards, who won the French World Scrabble Championship without knowing French. So he goes on, and in the foreword it says, Ultra Learning explores this fascinating subculture, shares a proven framework for a successful ultra learning project, and offers insights into how you can organize and execute a plan to learn anything deeply and quickly. The book was published by HarperCollins in the Harper Business imprint, and as I say, came out in 2019. And it's been around and been actually updated a bit. So you may find multiple listings for it. So Chapter 1, Can You Get an MIT Education Without Going to MIT? And he lays out how he got a computer science education from the MIT materials without paying or attending classes. Then he explains in Chapter 2 why ultra learning matters. Then Chapter 3, How to Become an Ultra Learner. And then he lays out 9 principles in the next chapters. So Principle 1, Meta-Learning. First, draw a map. Here what he's doing is he's saying, figure out what you're going to need to do in order to learn this. What kind of materials you have to collect, what kinds of time you have to set aside, what kinds of processes you have to build into your life. And then Principle 2, Focus. He calls it sharpen your knife, which is to say, cut out all those distractions. Number 3, directness. Go straight ahead. Don't let all the little sidetracks sidetrack you. Principle number 4, drill. Attack your weakest point. He points out that if you are weak in your vocabulary as you're learning a language, drill on that vocabulary. If you're weak on the pronunciation, if people can't understand you, absolutely drill on the pronunciation. But if people can understand you, that may not be what you want to put your effort into. The number 5 principle, retrieval. Okay, so in a classroom, he points out, Our process usually is that we learn something and then we take the test, and we are retrieving actually more information in the testing process. And he points out, if you're the kind of person that tends not to do the exercises at the end of the chapter, you probably only have a very surface knowledge, whereas if you can do the exercises, you will learn more. Principle 6 is feedback. He says, don't try to avoid being told you didn't do it well by avoiding feedback. You need the feedback, immediate feedback, the sooner the better feedback. That's actually one of the things that when they were first testing people for psychic abilities, people who weren't given immediate feedback tended to get worse over time, whereas the people who were told immediately whether they had a hit or not a hit, or whether they were close or not close, were more likely to improve over time. Principle 7, retention. He says, don't fill a leaky bucket. Don't try to keep going if you haven't retained what you've already learned. Make sure that you are in a position to reiterate. And one of the things he suggests at that point is literally, if you're not hanging on to some content, then go back to the sources you've been using and write it and rephrase it in your own language, and you will retain it more fully. Principle 8, intuition. He says, dig deep before building up. Check to see what you are already aware of in your inner knowing before you add more outside stuff to the process. And principle 9, experimentation, which he calls exploring outside your comfort zone. Then he gives us some suggestion in Chapter 13 for what he calls your first ultra-learning project, how to set it up and go through it. And in Chapter 14, he offers what he would call an unconventional education. So this is the book Ultra Learning, Master Hard Skills and Outsmart the Competition by Scott Young. If you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be much better if we understood our consciousness more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today or what you, the listeners, are curious about. As I was reviewing the science news feeds that I go through this last week, I was delighted to see that we've reached the point now where using stem cells and various other techniques, more and more laboratory scientists have been able to grow human tissues in laboratory conditions, and they are calling for the scientific community to end animal testing of chemicals. I'm very curious to see how the Food and Drug Administration will respond to this, because there is now no scientific basis for having animals in cages being poked and prodded and medicated against their nature in order for human beings to feel safe to use products that have been developed in various research labs. So yes, we are now able to grow human tissues from stem cells in most cases, and no, those are not necessarily abortion stem cells. You can get a stem cell off of any person at any time, yes, and they will then be able to test whether a chemical has a negative effect on those cells without causing distress to any other life form. The world is truly improving, regardless of what the media tries to tell us. I'm so happy to say. Well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use our consciousness fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there are past shows listed with the books and authors and clips that we use on the show, and where you can fill in the form to send me your comments and questions, which I will do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, Thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.